Let's get your reaction to Man City's 2-0 win against Fulham on the final day of the Premier League season. City have secured third place and have qualified for the Champions League for a 15th consecutive season, salvaging something positive from what has been a disappointing campaign overall. City's task of returning to the Champions League was taken to the final day, which was not ideal, but against Fulham, they were in command for large parts of that match, weren't they, Stephen? And they
Yeah.
did enough in the end to get the job done.
Yeah, they just about deserved it. Fulham definitely had chances. I'm not going to sit here and pretend it was we were cruising. If it wasn't for Edison with some big saves, it might be a different story. And you look at the stats and so on, they show that Fulham have plenty of big chances themselves. But I think City were good value for the win in the end. We created lots of chances ourselves. We were, not as clinical. As you expect, but that's been City's problem all season. But largely, I thought City were good value for it. I think it's sort of telling that Guardiola once again lent on the older players, the more experienced ones, which has been a sort of story the past few weeks. And it was those guys you'd argue that stepped up. No, De Bruyne was a surprise, but Gundogan rolled back the years as he always does on the final day of the season. He was remarkable. I didn't know he could stretch like that these days with the overhead kick, and it was a lovely little pirouette as well that led to the penalty. But Bernardo was hustling about everywhere as he always does, and City, yeah, they were just they were good. They weren't incredible, but Fulham are a very good side to go away to these days. Like everyone is. I've said this on videos of you before, but there's Champions League level players every single side these days. It's just such a high quality league, and Fulham are a perfect example of that. Like go back 15 years and these guys, the quality would be Europa League football, I reckon. And it's just like now, they're finishing mid-table and it's not because they've done anything wrong for them. They're a good side, but they're 11th and they've got so much quality. So, yeah, overall, it was a good performance. It got the job done. And I think in the end, City did salvage a season to something relatively respectable.
Yeah, and how important was it for City to avoid slipping into the Europa League and making sure that they're now competing in Europe's top club competition next season, the Champions League?
Essential, absolutely. There is no way City could operate in the way that they wanted to without Champions League football next year. Well, maybe we could because players always want to come to Manchester City, but I would argue financially the impact would have been pretty catastrophic ahead of the potential rebuild that's been talked about an awful lot now. So yeah, I think City had to get this Champions League spot and to get third, in the end, and was sort of satisfying given the sort of relative, but given where we were, at one point of the season, it was important. I think City are a club that can't afford to be out the Champions League, with PSR and financial fair play and all that kind of stuff. A lot of people there's a lot of scrutiny on Manchester City, put it that way. And financially, given the outlay it's going to be necessary to replace, like you can't just, like many years ago, back to 2017, and you got Bernardo Silva for 40 million quid, and you got, Kyle Walker for 50 million pounds. Kyle Walker was the best fullback in the country at the time. And you got people like Danilo came in for about 30 million quid from Real Madrid. Who else was it last season? Mendy, obviously for 50 million pounds, and then there was like Laporte in the same season. These players now they cost an extra 30 million pounds more. Like we're linked to Livramento, for example. That it's like rumored 65, 70 million if City want him, and he's not even the best right back in the league. You would argue, or maybe he is, but it's not clear cut in the way that Kyle Walker was Team of the Year and all that kind of stuff. I guess the point I'm making is that you need that extra money because it's going to be a two to 300 million pound outlay just to get five quality players in these days. Because good players don't cost 30, 40 million pounds anymore. They cost 65, 70 million pounds. And and if you miss out on Champions League football, it makes that almost impossible financially, given the scrutiny that clubs are under. So it was absolutely huge that City finished there. And look, third, given everything, once again, not bad.
Yeah, it was pleasing from City perspective to end on some sort of high, but overall, it is fair to say that it's been a disappointing campaign overall. They won the Community Shield back in August last year, but they've failed to come away with any major silverware for the first time in 8 years. So, how would you assess City's season overall, Stephen? What are the big changes really that need to be made now over the summer to put things right for next season?
Yeah, it's all relative to Manchester City's expectations. Look, I understand, if you asked me about this 15 years ago, I would have leapt at the chance to, take this as a season because well, slightly more than 15 years ago, maybe 16, 17 years ago, because obviously 15 years ago was the Aguero moment. But yeah, I think this is it's a good it's good for where City used to be, but where we are now, after you won 4 leagues in a row in the treble, is of course a massive letdown. And it's not the fact that we finished third; it's the fact that we finished miles behind Liverpool. That's what Guardiola's frustrated about. It's not the fact that we didn't win the Champions League; it's the fact that we were pathetic in it. That is the issue really for Manchester City. It's not winning. You want to win, of course. It's the manner of it and the fact that in the end it was a bit of a catastrophe, through the winter months. That's what really derailed the season. It's kind of strange. I actually saw a table from January the 1st for the Premier League. City are top of it. City had been the best side in the league, even played one game less than Liverpool as well. The most points accrued since January the 1st. And it's weird because we started the season with like 9 games unbeaten or something like that as well. And like it was just that weird middle spell where City just absolutely collapsed. That hadn't happened, the City had just been okay. They might have won the league, or at very least pushed Liverpool to the end of the day by just being okay in that winter spell. But that never happened, and City were absolutely awful. They were truly awful over the winter months, and they let themselves down in big games. Look, there's no world in which losing to Spurs 4-1 at home is acceptable. There's no world in these days in not getting a victory against Man United, given how poor they've been as well. I know it's a derby, anything can happen, but there's been failures of immense note. We look played off the park in the Champions League convincingly by Real Madrid, the team that we used to do the same to. Even if they beat us, we were the better footballing side always. Madrid were miles ahead of City. We've seen teams that routinely would have been terrified of City come to the Etihad and attack us and have a lot of joy. We were limp. We weren't limp actually. We were just lacking conviction. I would argue in the FA Cup final, I think City were the better side, but the mentality wasn't there and the belief. And these are all the negatives. And I think there's been some really poor decision making from around the club with who to lean on and when not to lean on people, not to reinvest the money. We saw our captain mid-season decide to just go for a jolly over in Italy because he didn't like the fact he wasn't playing. That's a leader, the man who's one of the most experienced in Kyle Walker. That was just shambles. Millions of off the pitch rumours, loads of injuries, just an absolute uh, show. But what I mean? It's been an absolute dive at times, but somehow City still managed to finish third. They did win the Community Shield, and people can argue all day about whether that's a valid trophy or not. But ultimately, City lifted silverware at Wembley, which once again most people would dream of. They got to another FA Cup final. Which is their third in a row, and the 7 FA Cup semi-final in a row, and they finished third, 1 point behind. Was it 1 point in the end, or was it 2 points behind? I don't know. They finished close to the glorious Arsenal, apparently, was challenging all season. So I guess the point I'm making is that it feels like it should be, a 3 out of 10 season. I don't think it was actually. I think it would end up being like maybe a five, something like that. Just a pretty average one. It's one of those things where if we were prepared for it, like if someone said to us, City aren't going to the league this year, it's going to be a sort of transitional one. We'll have a lot of injuries. It'll derail the season a little bit, and some of the key players will probably find that their legs aren't quite as there. I don't think people would have been that upset. I mean, it was the shock of it happening in the moment, if that makes sense, and the fact that the results were in that horrible bunch together. If they were spread out a little bit more, if we'd had a couple of losses in the first 10 games, then a couple more in the last 15, I think it wouldn't have stung quite as bad as that massive spell where we were just losing loads of games, and that really compounded the season. That's not saying if it was acceptable; it just wasn't good enough. The quality of football wasn't good enough this season. But once again, Guardiola's floor is a lot of people's ceilings, and I know City have got a lot of money and they've spent a lot and they've got the quality there. That's probably why it's so high, the quality of City and where they finished even a bad season. But it could be worse, and it felt like it felt like a disaster. But when you look at it, it technically hasn't been because a disaster is. Look at where United are and Spurs are. That is an absolute disaster of a season. We saw Chelsea win the league, then Mourinho get sacked when they were 12th, at one point. That's a disaster. City have been nowhere near that at any point. So, as much as it feels terrible, and it probably is, it didn't end up terrible. It just ended up, not bad.
Yeah, and so in terms of the summer now, and there's obviously lots of changes are expected, in terms of this squad rebuild. That those two words seem to be used a lot now heading into the summer. And what are the big changes really for you that need to be changed for City in order to get back to the top next season?
They need to sort of reinvest in young, hungry players. I know the older guys like Bernardo and Gundogan and De Bruyne as well. Before obviously he's moving on, but they were at Kovacic as well. But they were good towards the end of the season. And they helped, but I think their frailties were shown. And I was seeing some stats that show that City are just a very average, lower to mid-table team now in terms of out of play stuff. They can't keep up physically. Whether City like it or not, or Guardiola likes it or not, the Premier League is now at the most physical it's ever been. Teams are intensely structurally organised. You've got teams like Bournemouth. I like Bournemouth, put them back 20 years, they'd be finishing in the top four. They are so well run. They're so organised. They're so skillful, structured, aggressive, assertive. And I know they dropped off a little bit recently, but everyone's like this now. Everyone's like this, and City just can't really do that to an extent. We saw signs of it at one point when Guardiola was playing, Nico Gonzalez, Marmoush Kusanov, who came in. He was playing Nico O'Reilly, and he was playing the younger guys. City's out of play possession, out of play, movement and work rate was a lot better. They need to find a way to up that because ultimately City don't have the physicality these days. They have to move on plays that are unreliable. People like Stones and Ake just Stones, this might be he might have played his last ever game in a City shirt, and he wasn't even in the match day squad sadly because he can't be trusted. And they're moving on, probably Jack Grealish, which I'm not sure we'll talk about, but it seems almost like the writing's on the wall there. Guardiola, coy, I would argue, but look, you can read between the lines. It clearly is on a challenge for Grealish to go and move on if he wants to. City need to reinvest in players that are young, can run, they're hungry because they haven't been gorged on trophies and Premier League success. Like people we're linked to Rangers at Milan, Serie A midfielder of the season, but they finished mid-table, whatever it was. We've just been linked to Ray and Nori, the Wolves fullback as well. Perfect, early 20s, hungry, wants to take that step up. That is the kind of player we want now. The young, hungry players who can take City to the next level and contribute as well physically. People who are strong, who can match the pace of the Premier League these days, while also being technically good. So we need to reinvest with the right players and the right players who want it, while also moving on and saying thank you to some of the senior ones. And not because they've let themselves down towards the end of the season. It's just because I don't think they can go again to the same level. It's just not fair to keep expecting it from them.